welcome, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here today. As promised, we're going to try to continue to keep you updated as we make progress in our investigation. We have to announce on the committee hearing on Monday, March 20th, we have confirmed that Admiral Rogers from the NSA will be here, along with Director Comey will be here. That will be a public hearing. The other witnesses, we have given them the date of March 28th to be here. Some of them couldn't make the March 20th date. It does sound like that most of them will be able to make the March 28th date. We don't know the location of that hearing yet, but I think the time will be 10 a.m. Secondly, I want to say, as I told you last week about the issue with the President talking about tapping Trump Tower, that evidence still remains the same, that we don't have any evidence that took place. And in fact, I don't believe, just in the last week of time, the people we've talked to, I don't think there was an actual tap of Trump Tower. However, as I expressed last week, and I remain even more concerned about this, which are twofold. One, the incidental collection of Americans that were possibly tied to the Trump campaign that could have been leaked, similar to General Flynn. And secondly, the unmasking of Americans' names, potentially for political purposes, which we're continuing to ask more about that. Mr. Schiff and I are sending a letter today to Director Comey, Pompeo, and Admiral Rogers, asking for the total number of names that were unmasked over the course of the last 6 months. And that letter, I think we'll pass that letter out to all of you so that you will have it. Lastly, the third issue that I have to bring to you today is we are a little uncomfortable with the ODNI and whether or not they're going to let us have the proper computer technology that we need to go through the evidence that exists out at the CIA out at Langley. And we are trying to work through that, but I can tell you that it has become a bit of a stumbling block for our investigators to actually be able to compile and go through the information. So those are the three issues that I have for you today, and I'd like to ask Mr. Schiff if you'd like to say a couple comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to join in saying that to date I've seen no evidence that supports the claim that President Trump made that his predecessor had wiretapped he and his associates at Trump Tower. Thus far, we have seen no basis for that whatsoever. We still want the Justice Department to respond to our letter. We've given them until March 20th. We're both willing to use compulsory process if that's necessary, though neither of us, I think, believe that will be necessary. Certainly, at the open hearing that we have on March 20th, we will be asking the director if he has seen any evidence that substantiates the president's claim. It deeply concerns me that the president would make such an accusation without basis. We think it's in the public interest that this be addressed very openly by the director, and we certainly expect that he will. It's my understanding that the three witnesses who had conflicts or other issues with the March 20th hearing are all available and I believe committed to the March 28th hearing. So the following week we'll get the remaining testimony from those witnesses, and we'll have as much time as necessary at the hearing for our members to ask their questions. Obviously, there's a substantial amount they may not be able to answer in open session, but we want to conduct as much of this investigation as we can in the open so the public is informed of the progress that we're making. Our members are going to the agency to review the documents. Our full committee now has access to the Gang of Eight materials that underlie the assessment that the intelligence community put out. I spent a few hours there yesterday and would encourage all the members to spend time out at the agency reviewing those documents. Finally, we I think are continuing to make progress, and the chairman and I are doing everything that we can to keep this investigation bipartisan or nonpartisan, to make sure that we follow the evidence wherever it leads, and that is certainly our hope, and will continue to be our effort to do so. And with that, we're happy to respond to any questions.
Yeah, it's a question about incidental collection. What's the information about the Trump associates gathered through incidental collection, and are you satisfied that this information was used lawfully?
So as it relates to, we know for a fact, because it's out there in public, that incidental collection on General Flynn was picked up. What I remain concerned about is whether or not there is additional incidental collection that we are not aware of, and then if any of that information was put into any types of intelligence reports, and then whether or not additional names were unmasked. So if additional names were unmasked, we're going to have to understand where the proper procedures followed, and then did additional names get leaked to the media, or were people using that information for other purposes that wouldn't have had intelligence value? And that's what I remain concerned about, and that's why the letter that you see today, we're asking for all of those names by Friday.
Mr. Chairman, is that also your view on the matter?
Well, I think it's certainly an appropriate part of our oversight to make sure that the agencies are following the correct procedures when it comes to unmasking any names of Americans that may be gathered through incidental collection. But I do want to underscore that this is a separate matter from whether the president's allegations have any truth. And though we're talking about both these issues, the two are not related in the sense that there's no evidence that there was a wiretap of Trump and his associates at Trump Tower.
Mr. Nunes, you said pretty clearly that you do not think that Trump Tower was tapped. What gives you that confidence to say?
Well, I actually said that last week. I think the challenge here is that President Obama wouldn't physically go over and wiretap Trump Tower. So now you have to decide, as I mentioned to you last week, are you going to take the tweets literally? And if you are, then clearly the president was wrong. But if you're not going to take the tweets literally, and if there's a concern that the president has about other people, other surveillance activities, looking at him or his associates, either appropriately or inappropriately, we want to find that out. I think it's all in the interpretation of what you believe.
And is there anything you've seen in the evidence so far that suggests that there were any conversations between people affiliated with the Trump campaign, Russian officials who are not the ambassador to Russia, anyone other tied to the Kremlin had conversations with the Trump campaign? Do you have any evidence?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mr. Chairman, the White House
I wouldn't answer that question as categorically as my colleague, and we're not privileged to talk about the contents of the investigation, but I think we need to be very precise when we talk about this, and I just don't think we can answer categorically and not in this forum.
Mr. Chairman, the White House has said that they are extremely confident that the president will ultimately be vindicated in this claim. You're obviously pressing DOJ to release any evidence that they may have, but what about the White House? Are you also pressing them and encouraging them to reveal what the president knew, his grounds for making this claim? Yeah,
we're going to continue to follow the facts where they are. We're not going to make any assumptions. But as I've said before, I mean, for a long time here, I have been very clear about my concern about, number one, the incidental collection on General Flynn, how that was put into a product, how it was unmasked, how it was leaked to the public. Several crimes have been committed here, and I want to make sure that I don't want to get into. So, Mr. Schiff, I don't know if you want to respond to that question also. So.
I would just say that I do think it's incumbent if we get to March 20th and we have the testimony. I think we all expect from the director that there was no substance to the accusation that Barack Obama illegally wiretapped Trump Tower, that the president explained himself. I think you can't level an accusation of that type without either retracting it or explaining just why it was done. And I think that there are, from a national security perspective, great concerns if the president is willing to state things like that without any basis, because the country needs to be able to rely on him, particularly if we have a crisis that is an external crisis, as every president does within their term of office. So I think it is a serious matter, and I appreciate the chairman's willingness to have an open hearing on this, and I think the testimony will be very important.
Mr. Chairman,
Let's get a new, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you have any reason to believe that the president himself or anyone working for him in the White House would be one of these names that may have been swept up in something that could then have ultimately been leaked, like what happened with Michael Flynn?
Well, I think it's very possible, but like I said, we should know that by Friday.
Do you think the president himself might be one of those people that was swept up in this?
It's possible. You know, look, I mean, we know, we think we understand how General Flynn was picked up in incidental collection, and perhaps there's, you know, additional incidental collection, or the other intelligence products where there was unmasking that occurred. Look, this is why we're sending a letter. Let's get it all out in the open so that we understand. You know, we don't, like I've said many times, I'm concerned about unmasking of Americans' names, but I think as they relate to, as you'll see in the letter, as they relate to either the Trump campaign and his folks, or Hillary Clinton's campaign and her folks, we'd like to know if any names were unmasked, and I think that would help answer these questions.
If I could, let me just, if I can, also respond on that in a couple ways. First, Mr. Spicer has represented that he is not aware of any investigation that was targeting the president, and presumably no court-ordered surveillance of the president. He has also said that he is confident that the president was speaking accurately when he said he was wiretapped by his predecessor. Those two things cannot both be true unless he is suggesting that the FBI was engaged in a rogue operation unsupervised by a court to wiretap Trump Tower. There is absolutely no evidence of that, and no suggestion of any evidence of that. And I think to even put that forth, it was irresponsible of the president and his spokesman. And I also, in terms of our oversight responsibility, want to make one other point, and that is, while I think it perfectly appropriate that we oversee the FISA process and the unmasking of any names, if any of that is implicated in any way, I have seen no evidence of any illegality in terms of any electronic surveillance pertaining to your question. So I don't want anything to be surmised that we're suggesting otherwise.
Chairman, if you don't get those names by Friday, will you subpoena that information as well?
Well, most likely, yes. If they don't have a good reason for not giving us that. I mean, FISA is a critical tool that our intelligence agencies use. We want to make sure that that it's done lawfully and legally, and that, you know, part of that is going to be, even if it has to be at the Gang of 8 level, so just Mr. Schiff and myself, that would be fine. But we do need to have a good understanding of how that process worked.
Mr. Chairman, can you say whether, are you driving at here that you think that Trump and the Trump associates were reverse targeted without a proper warrant, but they were tasked to basically look at anything that was incidentally collected, and then that was disseminated? Is that what you're looking for?
I don't want to look. Let's wait till Friday for them to come out with the information, and then we'll have the open hearing on Monday before we start to speculate. But clearly, I just want to make sure that the FISA processes were properly followed, and that the unmasking of names did not occur improperly.
You know, and I just want to add that I certainly have seen no evidence of that.
I'm sorry, over here we had a question.
Can you elaborate a little on the concern you mentioned earlier about ODNI not giving you the technological setup to review some of the intelligence underlying the conclusions? Yeah, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which is overseeing how we have access to these documents. One of the simple things that I think should be, everyone should understand this, is that we should be able to get a basic type of computer system out there to be able to catalog all of the data that went into the intelligence report that was produced and the beginning of January, whatever that date was, January 6th or 7th. I just think that's a no-brainer, and why they would even stop us on this is beyond me. And is there any reason? I mean, are they stalling, or are they saying you can't have have access to this?
Well, the bottom line is that we don't have a computer out there to actually be able to catalog the information.
And, you know, if I could just add to one of the reasons why this is significant, and obviously there was a big issue with the agency over the Senate's use of a computer and whether that computer was viewed by the agency while it was in the process of a review of the enhanced interrogation techniques. We feel a real sense of urgency about conducting this investigation not only thoroughly, but as swiftly as possible, given the magnitude of the investigation. So anything that slows us down is a problem. And I'm confident this will be ultimately resolved, but the longer it takes to resolve it, you know, the longer it takes us to do our work. And we had to work through the issue of gaining access to the full committee of the Gang of Eight materials. Now we have to work through the issue of getting access to computers to do our work. We're also working our way through the budget process here to get increased staff to help us with the investigation. It's going to take time to get those staff cleared. So these are all some of the challenges we're dealing with in trying to do this expeditiously.
Without the computer, how are you going through the information that you're...
Well, right now, you know, I was there yesterday taking a lot of handwritten notes, which is not ideal, and obviously we have to leave our notes behind. But at the end of the day, what we hope to do, obviously, is when the investigation is finished, is compile a report, and having the information that we go through indexed with our comments will be very important in terms of putting that report together. So this will be resolved. Hopefully, what the chairman and I are saying today will help nudge the agency along in making it happen.
Has the FBI actually confirmed that there's an investigation ongoing into Russia and the Trump campaign?
Well, look, we're not going to get into what the FBI tells us or doesn't tell us, as the ranking member said earlier. But as you can imagine, this committee's has a long track record of trying to shine the light on the Russian government and their activities. We, as the House Intelligence Committee, have long had an investigation into Russian activities, especially cyber activities. That continues. And clearly, I think the concerns we've raised over just cyber attacks alone, you know, we would hope that many throughout the IC are conducting investigations into the Russians and their ongoing bad activity around the globe.
So, do you have any evidence that there were contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians? That's the question we've been asking you every time.
Yeah, I don't have any evidence of that, and we're not going to get into. I mean, this gets to the whole issue of incidental collection. You know, who else was talking to the Russian ambassador? This is a slippery slope. So I think you just need to let the appropriate agencies get us the information in a timely manner, which I agree with the ranking member on. The more that they stall, the more they make it more complicated for us, the slower the investigation goes, and the more time it takes to answer your questions.
You know, and I do want to say on that question, because Director Clapper was asked a similar question. I cannot answer that question in the same way, not certainly with the same categorical nature of the response. So I don't share that summary conclusion, and that's about all I can say on that subject.
Have you been able to get access to those ODNY?
Go ahead.
Have you been able to get access to those computers in past investigations? I mean, is this something you would typically get stalled out on, or is this kind of an unprecedented?
Well, this is a little unprecedented in terms of, you know, the whole committee now has access to all the members on the Intelligence Committee have access to what are called the Gang of Eight source documents. We now have investigators out there. Many members from my side and the ranking member's side have been out there, and you know, the challenge we're having now is that we need to be able to catalog all of this in a simple way. If not, it's going to take us longer to get through it if we have to do it all by hand.
Chairman, quick question. You said that several crimes have been committed here, but it's not illegal to unmask a name if it deals with an investigation having to deal with national security, right? So I wanted you to expound on that. And secondly, Congressman Schiff, you said that the FBI hadn't been cooperating, and then you said that they had started cooperating. What has occurred in between those two statements?
As it relates to crimes that have been committed, I am quite confident that it is illegal to leak FISA collected names of Americans That's illegal. It's also illegal to leak any additional classified information. So that has happened. It remains the crimes that we know that have been committed, which I'm sure we'll get into more of that on Monday. Mr. Schiff, there's a second question on, I think.
With respect to the second question, the concern that I raised a couple weeks ago was that during our hearing with Director Comey, a number of the questions members had, the director declined to answer. It wasn't that I was unsatisfied with the content of the answer, it was that he simply declined. And I expressed it at the time, my hope that the director would go back to the Department of Justice and be prepared to come back to us and respond more fully to the questions we were asking. The FBI has now been more forthcoming on a number of the issues I was concerned about. There are still a number of other issues that remain to be ironed out, but we are certainly getting more cooperation than we were initially.
Did any of the incidental collection come through a foreign intelligence service?
I don't think we can comment on any questions related to what kind of intelligence gathering or electronic surveillance. Apart from, I think, the category that the president tweeted about, I don't think we're at liberty to talk about either the contents of the investigation or the conduct of any of our foreign intelligence gathering.
And just on that point, if I can, in the White House briefing earlier this week, Sean Spicer seemed to blur the lines on the definition of wiretapping, saying that this was sort of code, if you will, for broader surveillance, which would cover incidental collection.
Well, I can express my view, and the chair and I may have a different perspective on this, but my interpretation, frankly, of what the White House has been communicating since the president's tweets were, first, we don't want to talk about this, we're giving it to the Intelligence Committee. Then, we're not sure if there's any there. Then, well, maybe he meant something different to, well, maybe it was the TV or the microwave, no, we fully believe the president will be vindicated in his claims of wiretapping. So they've been all over the map. The reality is, I don't think they have the foggiest idea what was behind the president's claim, except maybe something you watched on TV. And I think the rest is designed to downplay, minimize, or obfuscate the fact that the president said something that was patently untrue. But that is my interpretation.
And Chairman Nunes, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think first,
incidental collection first from a foreign agency, and then.
Yeah, I think Mr. Schiff answered that properly. I don't want to get into where intelligence is coming from or not coming from, but I think I want to stop here just a second and say that it's okay for Mr. Schiff and I to have disagreements. He represents a district just like I do. We're clearly from different political parties. And at the end of the day, it's all on our interpretation of what people say or don't say. And it's the court of public opinion ultimately that has the say in all this. But we're going to work together, and we're probably going to have a lot that we're going to agree on. We may have some things we disagree on. We'll try to get through those. But as it relates to the president's claims, just like I said last week, I think you just have to be careful about how literally you take these comments. But I do remain concerned, as I opened with, that there could be incidental collection and there could be unmasking of American names that I really do want to get to the bottom of. And if we move forward from this, I actually agree with Mr. Schiff on the point that, look, if the White House or the president want to come out and clarify his statements more, it would probably be helpful. But look, at the end of the day, just like I said last week, President Obama doesn't do wiretapping, just like President Trump can't do wiretapping. So the whole premise of the statement was wrong. So then you have to figure out, okay, did he actually mean it literally or did he not? And I think that's the question that we have here.
Can I just be clear on one point here, because it was the first question I asked. So you are not satisfied that the unmasking or the incidental collection was done in a lawful manner?
Well, I guess I would refer you back to, matter of fact, I was just going through this earlier. As you probably, some of you may remember, over the course of the last year, we had a concern about members of Congress who were caught up in incidental collection. This story came out publicly in the Wall Street Journal regarding, I think it was involving the Israelis. And then we went through a whole year-long process working with the IC to ensure that when congressional identities are picked up in incidental collection, that we, the Gang of Eight, are notified of that happening. And so I would kind of refer you back to that. That was a process that had to be cleaned up, because clearly there was, clearly people knew who the members of Congress were likely that were in these, but they weren't being unmasked. We weren't being notified. That's a problem. Now, so the question I would have is, has that happened again? And we don't know that, but we want to find out.
Mr. Nunes, are you concerned about the contacts that apparently occurred between Roger Stone and Guccifer 2.0, of course, who's known as a Russian hacker? Is that something you're looking into?
Look, I know this sounds, I only know Roger Stone from what I've seen on TV. I don't know that he had any formal role in the campaign that I'm aware of.
The committee's not going to be looking into it?
Well, we'll follow facts wherever they lead us. But I don't, at this point, that's down the road.
What about Paul Mann?
If I could address that, and a couple of points I wanted to make just to follow up on one of the earlier questions. The chairman is exactly right. He and I think, may give a different interpretation to why the president said what he said. But there's no daylight between us on the fact that neither one of us have seen any evidence to support what the president tweeted. And I think that's probably the most important point. With respect to Roger Stone, we have a U.S. person affiliated with the campaign who has now said publicly that he had communications, I think first he said with Julian Assange, and then he said after that with an intermediary to Mr. Assange or WikiLeaks, and has now acknowledged having communication with Guccifer 2, which the intelligence community views as essentially a Russian cutout. And obviously these two platforms were used to publish documents damaging to Secretary Clinton and helpful to Donald Trump. So I'll tell you, that concerns me a great deal, because you have someone affiliated with a campaign having direct communication with two of the outlets, apparently during the campaign, and in one case, as I recall, Mr. Stone predicted that John Podesta's time in the barrel would come. So while Mr. Stone has said that he could not have predicted the DNC hack before it happened, he apparently did predict that John Podesta would be in the barrel. So I think it does beg a lot of questions that I would certainly like answered.
Do you want to interview him, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn? Does the committee want to talk to these?
Well, I don't want to go through a witness list, but I do want to respond that those facts that he has already admitted are of great interest and concern to me.
And look, as I've said before, if these people want to come forward to our committee, they're welcome to, and they're welcome to provide either depositions, written testimony, and that remains the case. So anybody who wants to come forward with information, but as I've said, we're not going to just call in witnesses based on just press reports alone.
Is Michael Flynn cooperating with your investigation?
We have not spoke to Mr. Flynn at this point.
And are you confident that you can complete a full and complete investigation without seeing Mr. Trump's tax returns?
Yes, I am.
Well, I think we ought to look into obviously the full range of active measures the Russians employed. If one of the Russian active measures was the same as what they have done in Europe, and that is financially entangle people as a way of exerting influence over them, then it may be within the scope of our investigation, but I don't think we want to begin with that conclusion.
There's a problem with taking Trump's tweets literally and how the actual literal implication of this tweet was most certainly wrong. Do you have any communications with anyone in the White House about the problem of this, the problem with when the president tweets something that you know, an ally of the president, say is flat out wrong?
Well, look, we've talked about this here at these press conferences before. I think the president tweeting is a good thing, and there's a fine line between having too many people monitoring what he's saying and no one monitoring what he's saying. But look, he's the President of the United States, and I think him tweeting, I think the American people, for the most part, enjoy it, including all of you in the press. I think people enjoy these tweets, and just hopefully, it would be helpful if they could be a little more focused. But at the end of the day, he's elected, and I'm not.
This turns
What
out to
do
be.
you for the letter now? Has the intel community been strong on you on any of this? And do you expect the recipients to actually respond by Friday?
Yeah, I would expect, with the seriousness of the with everything as it relates to FISA and the problems that we already had a year ago, dealing with the notification of Congress on people in Congress that were identified, I would hope that they would rapidly get these responses to us. Because look, either it's going to be more evidence that we'll have to continue this investigation on this matter of dealing with FISA, or we'll be able to put that to bed. The faster we can put any FISA problems to bed, the better for the IC and the American people.
And I would join the chairman in what he said earlier, that I'd expect the FBI and the department to fully cooperate. If they don't, I'd be prepared to support the use of compulsory process.
Any more questions?
Chairman, have you seen any evidence that Yahoo was involved?
Hold on a second. Let's go over here and then we'll come back.
In your mind, what do you see as the most important question the committee is trying to answer with this investigation? And the same question is to Congressman Schiff.
Yeah, I don't see that there's one important question. I think they're all important. Overall, this is great for the work that we've done over many years here on this committee, because finally the American people are awakening to the fact that Putin is creating problems for us and our allies all over the globe. So this is something that I've desperately wanted people to pay attention to. Perhaps if the last administration paid closer attention to what we were saying at the time, the opportunities and the options that Congress gave to the last administration to help the Ukrainians and other countries, if they would have used those and not waited till the end, until after the election to do something, I think would have been very helpful, and we wouldn't have had this outcome.
I think there are really obviously many important questions and many important objectives of the investigation. I guess I would highlight three. First, we need to know the whole range of what the Russians did, because we not only need to protect ourselves in the future, the intelligence community has already concluded they'll do this again, but also we need to do everything we can right now to be helping Europe, which is facing the same kind of information warfare the Russians used here. So identifying everything they did here and helping our allies, I think, is a very important priority. I also think that we need to look at the U.S. government response. How quickly did they respond? Where did they fall down on the job, if they fell down on the job? And how do we improve response in the future? And then finally, I think we know a lot about the Russian hacking and dumping. We know the Russians did it. We know, obviously, some of the platforms they use for the dissemination of this information. I think one question that the country has that is among the most weighty is, were U.S. persons involved? Did they get help? Was there any form of collusion with the campaign? And I think the public knows far less on that issue than they do on many of the others, and for that reason, as well as the far-reaching consequences one way or the other, I think it's very important that our committee get to the bottom of it and, if at all possible, speak with one voice on that important issue.
Regarding
one more question here.
Four Russians were indicted just now by a justice regarding this, including 2 FSB officers, Dmitry Dukachev and Igor Sushlin. Have you seen any evidence they were involved beyond the Yahoo breach and involved in Russian interference in their election?
No, and I'd hate to comment without actually seeing the indictment and what's taken place over the course of the last few hours.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have anything to add on that as well, except to say that I think these kind of prosecutions are very important, even if we are not able to get custody of the person, just for the message that it sends that we take these forms of cyber crime very seriously, that we'll call out the people responsible, and where there's any state involvement, we will also try to bring up about additional repercussions in addition to criminal indictment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so very much. We'll see you on Monday.